As Americans reckon with racial injustice, police brutality, and a spike in anti-Asian attacks, we have an opportunity to relearn our shared history and build on that solidarity. And so that is perhaps a perfect segue to our next presentation. I'm going to invite next to the stage Sandeep Gupta, who is a partner at Deloitte and Touche LLP, a past board member of Ascend. He'll be presenting a study directly relevant to that article and directly relevant to our theme, and that Ascend study is entitled Elevating Asian Black Allyship in Corporate America. So please give a warm, welcoming round of applause to Sandeep Gupta from Deloitte.
Oh boy. Thank you, Dr. Pinkett. Good morning still. So I'm here, as Dr. Pinkett said, I'm going to present about the study that Ascend put out recently. But before I get to that, I'm going to talk a little bit about Ascend. Dr. Pinkett mentioned that I'm a partner at Deloitte, but I'm here today to talk on behalf of Ascend and present a little bit color on who Ascend is and as well as what work we do. I've been a past board member at Ascend. I've been involved with them for the past 17 years. That's when the organization first started. The focus of the organization is really to assist Pan-Asians, to help them advance, and as well as elevate their careers. This is, as like I mentioned, a 17-year-old organization. Most of our programming is delivered through our 20-plus professional chapters across North America and 40-plus student chapters. Our programming is for students all the way to board members, so it's essentially a life cycle organization. Ascend Foundation is affiliated with Ascend and conducts its activities in many ways and various areas such as thought leadership, research, community services, education, and scholarships. Over the past 2+ years, the foundation has been very active to address the impact on Asians due to COVID and Asian hate. As you can see, we have undertaken many significant activities in a very short period of time. I wanted to call out a few of the activities. In the middle of the top row, included is our 5-point agenda and the Impact Fund. I will talk about both of those next. In the next row, on the left is a study that Dr. Pinkett referenced, which is about Asian and Black allyship. I'll spend a little extra time on that topic. And lastly, to the extreme right, is the mention about the A-List Awards, which is a recognition and celebration of Asian success, an event that we will be hosting at the end of this month. First up, the 5-point action agenda. This was created in mid-2020 to address the challenges faced by Asian hate that was so visible across the country. The previous panel mentioned that several times. We were impacted as individuals, as community, and as importantly, as businesses. The 5 key areas that we identified needed attention to provide the necessary and very timely support for the Asian community across North America. We were fortunate to work alongside some key organizations that are to the right on the screen. They worked very closely with us in setting the tone and the focus for us. What we are also very proud of and happy about is the 150-odd companies and allies that work with us that are all listed on this page. And we are grateful for their support. Several of these names are represented in this room today. Our initial work on the 5-point agenda paved the way for the creation of the Impact Fund. The Impact Fund was launched in 2021. The fund focuses on raising awareness of the history and prevalence of anti-Asian racism through expanding advocacy, allyship, education, and community engagement to create the change and advance the work of the foundation, change that we also desire. Our work is well underway for each of these 5 areas. As Dr. Pinkett mentioned, and I did too, that our most recent publication that has been received fairly well is the study on Asian and Black allyship. Not much work had been done on this topic in a formal way, Hence, we decided to tackle this area first. And as I was talking to one of the panelists that's going to come up next, we will be taking similar studies with other minority groups that really need, where the intersectionality does exist, and we really need to play that out so that the community at large, as well as corporate America, appreciates what some of those intersectionalities are and where the benefits are. So we will be undertaking some work with one of the panelists in the near future. Although there have been many pockets of allyship in community between Asians and Black, what we got to conclude very quickly is that there is very limited Black and Asian allyship in corporate America, and hence this focus. Most of the analysis commenced at one of the forums that we hosted in the latter part of 2021. I'll share a little bit of what we learned. This slide demonstrates a variety of responses that we received from those leaders, the CDEIOs, that had to respond to a very simple question that's listed on the page. The telling words on this page are complex, misunderstood, skeptical, distrustful, competing. Some hopeful and encouraging words are allies, empathy, sharing, progress, and finally improving. This question and the other questions that we posed to them made it very clear that a lot of work is needed to enhance or simply put in place the Asian and Black allyship once there was an understanding of what these communities were and how they overlapped in many ways. I'm just going to run through a few slides. I'll let you read through it. But just to highlight a couple of things. When the leaders were asked to rate current relations between Asian and Black employees, 4 in 10 responses supported a high rating, but only a 5% gave a rating of strong allyship between Asian and Black employees. This was the most difficult response that we received. 2/3 of the CDEIOs responded that in their view, their employees had low to almost no understanding or appreciation for the Asian American experience and history. Should be no surprise to this group that given that there is very little discussed about Asian Americans' experiences, and there is very limited, if anything, talked about Asian Americans in American history, as we know now that there is a rich history, but there is very little taught in schools, and some of that is starting to change, starting with the action that's being taken here in New York City to bring in Asian American as part of the K-12 curriculum. But so far, there has never been any mention, if at all, about Asian Americans in American history. One additional point I wanted to share from the study, when asked how well Black American lives and history is understood, 36% of the leaders responded that employees had low to no understanding, which seems odd because there is just so much in there in the history, but it is still not understood, was the point in corporate America, simply because there's not been any formal sharing of knowledge and information. And next, what has also not happened is the individuals have not taken the time to learn about the Black American history, and previously, as I mentioned, about the Asian history and experiences. The last 2 questions made it clear that allyship is challenged for each of these 2 groups, but when you look across the different groups that are also there, when you pair up Asian versus Latinx, Asian versus LGBTIQs, et cetera, there is very limited information on how they can partner, why they should partner, and what are some of the challenges. And all of this is mostly in reference to corporate America, and in some shape or form, it does show up in different institutions and communities as well. This was referred to by the previous panel as well. One large contributing factor in poor Asian and Black trust and allyship has resulted from the model minority labeling of Asians that originated back in mid-1960s. Since then, this has worked as a wedge between these 2 communities, addressing one minority group, that's Asians, as model for our society, very clearly implied or indicated that the other groups are failing or have failed, this repeated narrative over the last so many decades has created mistrust amongst the groups. The next few slides, I'm just going to tee up a little bit more on what were some of the weak partnerships in the workplace. Some of the areas that we identified, there were quite a few. I'm just highlighting 3 over here. That there was a lack of appreciation for the intersectionality between the communities. There was limited understanding of the privileges that exist in a workplace and how we should be navigating those. And to date, there was very limited collaboration, as I mentioned previously, across the different groups because of 2 reasons. One, there was not a lot of leadership for those topics, and there was not a lot of engagement by leaders on these topics. In this slide, the next 2, we try to just highlight what actions can be taken to address some of these shortcomings. As it relates to intersectionality, there's a need to understand what it is, what it means for the 2 groups to understand each other better and recognize the strengths in being Asian or being Black. Next, as it relates to privilege in the workplace, there needs to be safe and brave conversations. And I introduced the word brave over there because it takes a lot to talk very transparently and openly, to have the conversations so that there is imparting of knowledge on what privilege is in a workplace, and then for the Asian and the Black communities, either together or for themselves, individually or separately, find how privilege could be earned and obtained. And finally, as it relates to collaboration, there needs to be concerted effort for the groups to work together in a formal and an informal way, because and that collaboration to be conducted with the leaders of the 2 groups, but as importantly and more importantly, with the leadership of the organization and their participation. The conversations need to include not only the minority groups that I'm referring to here, it needs to include the majority as well to come to the right solutions and the programs. For each of these 3 areas, a lot of work is needed because in many instances, the framework that we are proposing or thinking about or that should be put in place do not exist or exist in a very limited way or exist in a very informal way. Lastly, what we thought was also very important to include in the study, and we have 3 slides on this topic, and I think Dr. Pinkett mentioned this, there's a lot of history for Asian Americans that overlaps or that is connected in many ways with the Black history. And you can go back several years, 100 years, a couple of 100 years, to see what that overlap is. This, as we aligned these 2 histories of these 2 groups, we saw that there was a lot to celebrate, but very importantly, there were a lot of difficult pain points that got identified that we need to be aware of. And it has been said this morning multiple times that there is a need to learn about our past and our history to appreciate where we are, to appreciate what the gaps exist in our identity, in being visible, and then to embark on creating solutions so that we are recognized for who we are and being recognized as being a fabric of this country. So with that, hopefully you get a quick overview of what Ascend is about, and as importantly, a quick overview of what Black and Asian allyship can be and should be, at least as it relates to corporate America. Thank you.
Give another round of applause to Sandeep. Show your love. And I took notes once again and took pictures as well. I was about to post to social media, but then he wrapped up. I said, I got to get back and do my job. But 2 things I want to highlight from Sandeep's presentation. When Asian success is juxtaposed against Black failure, this inevitably creates divisiveness between the 2 groups. That really struck a chord with me. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, but also struck a chord with me, was something that you deliberately highlighted, Sandeep, which was you talked about safe and brave conversations, and you punctuated on the brave. And I couldn't agree more. They're not easy conversations to have, but in the absence of having those conversations, the status quo remains. We have to acknowledge that the brave are not without fear. The brave operate despite their fear. So while it can be uncomfortable for us to engage in these dialogues, it is only through dialogue that we achieve greater understanding. The goal of a debate is to win. The goal of a discussion is to decide. The goal of a dialogue is to understand. We need more understanding, folks. We need more understanding.